The Unas made sure only the killer humans could come to the rescue when they attacked the defenseless colony planet Zephyr without warning. Alien warships descended from the sky in a hail of plasma bolts and torpedoes, strafing and bombing the surface. Skyscrapers toppled, homes burned, and debris choked the air. Civilians ran screaming before being cut down by energy beams. The colony's meager defenses were flattened in seconds. Alexander Parker, a human soldier on shore leave, sprinted through the chaos. He watched a Zephyrian child get vaporized by a crashing Unas fighter. Cursing, he leaped over rubble, racing toward the spaceport to find a ship. Any ship. He had to do something. "All settlements are to be razed to ash," snarled Unas Commander Murloc from his flagship in orbit. "Exterminate every colonist. Their blood will feed the soil before we harvest this planet's resources for the Unas." Alexander found an old two-seat shuttle in a burning hangar. Barely space-worthy. He powered it up and transmitted an emergency distress call to the human military. "Mayday, mayday! Zephyr Colony is under heavy assault by Unas forces. Thousands dead already. Requesting immediate support. I'll try to draw some of them away." He goosed the throttle, and the decrepit shuttle groaned out of the hangar. 3 Unas fighters immediately dove on him, plasma cannons blazing. Alexander jinked and juked, pulling maneuvers that rattled his bones and nearly tore the shuttle apart. Gouts of fire blossomed around him. Warning lights flashed across the controls. But he managed to dodge the worst of it and lead the fighters away from the colony. Low on fuel, and with multiple systems failing, Alexander aimed the shuttle for Zephyr's cratered moon. If he could reach those rocky canyons, maybe he could hold out until the human cavalry arrived. A plasma bolt sheared off his starboard engine and sent the craft tumbling. The moon's craggy surface filled the view screen. This was going to be rough. On the bridge of his warship, Murloc clenched his fists as he watched a single human draw his fighters away from the colony. Impossible. Unacceptable. This worm dared to defy the Unas. He would suffer greatly for his insolence. "Deploy landing parties to the moon," Murloc bellowed. "Hunt that human down and mount his head on my wall. We will make a gory example of him." As troop landers full of bloodthirsty Unas descended on the moon, Alexander pried himself from the shuttle's smoking wreckage. His weapon was a simple kinetic pistol. He had no armor, no supplies. And he was one against an army. But he was human, and he would fight to his last breath to protect the innocent people of Zephyr. Alarms blared across the bridge of the UHS Retribution as it dropped out of warp speed at the head of a battle fleet. Admiral Graves wrapped his hand around the chairs of his command chair, his eyes hard as he took in the tactical display. Zephyr hung vulnerable below, wreathed in the angry red swarm of Unas warships, unleashing devastation on the colony. "Open a channel to that crazy son of a bitch groundside," Graves barked. "Now!" The comm officer scrambled to comply. Static filled the speakers before resolving into Alexander's haggard voice. "Reading you, Retribution. About damn time you showed up." A tight smile tugged at Graves' lips. "Hang in there, Parker. I always knew you were too stubborn to die. We'll keep these bastards off your back, but I need you to hold out just a little longer. Cavalry's on its way planet-side." "You got it, Admiral. I'll buy you all the time I can. Parker out." Graves turned to his crew, his voice booming across the bridge. "You heard the man. Let's show these Unas scum what happens when they mess with humanity. All ships, engage the enemy. Draw them away from the colony." The human fleet surged forward, jam-packed with weapons. Missiles and energy beams lanced out, slamming into the Unas ships. The aliens swung to meet them, abandoning their bombardment of Zephyr in favor of the new threat. Space lit up with deadly exchanges of fire as the two fleets clashed. On the moon's surface, Alexander crept through the shadows, picking off Unas patrols one by one. He may be stranded and outgunned, but he was far from helpless. Scavenging demolition charges from the fallen, he snuck into the Unas' makeshift staging ground. Gritting his teeth, he planted the explosives on their landing craft and troop transports before slipping away. The charges detonated in a series of ear-splitting blasts, turning the ships into twisted wrecks. The Unas were stranded, their reinforcements cut off. In his flagship above, Murloc paced like a caged beast, his claws gouging furrows in the bulkheads. That human filth dared to defy him. Reports of the lone soldier's guerrilla attacks flooded in, each one stoking the flames of Murloc's rage. He snarled at his cowering subordinates, spittle flying from his fangs. "I want his head!" Murloc roared, slamming a fist onto the arm of his command throne, buckling the metal. "Rip it from his shoulders and bring it to me." The battle in orbit turned into a slugging match, human ships darting and weaving as they traded blows with the Una's fleet. Hull plating buckled, bulkheads ruptured, and flames spewed from gaping wounds. The humans took losses, but they bought time. Time for the Marines to make planetfall. Drop pods rained down on the moon's surface like meteors, disgorging squads of battle-hardened Marines led by Captain Hawkins. Quickly linking up with Alexander, they launched their counterattack, turning the hunters into the hunted. Hawkins clapped a hand on Alexander's shoulder, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Damn fine work, soldier. What do you say we take the fight to these bastards?" Alexander nodded, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "I've got just the place. Follow me." Together, the humans lured the Unas into a lethal trap. The aliens squeezed into a narrow, winding canyon in pursuit, heedless of the danger. Alexander and Hawkins moved with practiced efficiency, placing demolition charges at key structural points. The Unas pushed forward, their bloodlust blinding them to the jaws of the trap closing around them. Murloc led the charge, his eyes blazing with hatred as he locked onto Alexander. The two enemies met in a clash of flesh and fury, trading blows that would pulverize bone. Alexander ducked and weaved, his human speed and agility matched against Murloc's raw strength and savagery. The other humans held the line, pouring fire into the advancing Una's horde. In a final, desperate lunge, Alexander drove his combat knife to the hilt in Murloc's chest, the alien's blood spurting hot and viscous over his hands. Murloc staggered back, shock and rage twisting his features. Alexander stood over him, chest heaving, knife clenched and ready to strike again. But he hesitated. The look in Alexander's eyes wasn't one of triumph or bloodlust, but pity. He shook his head. "We're not butchers like you," Alexander said. He turned his back on the fallen Una's commander. "It's over." With those words, he and Hawkins triggered the charges. The canyon walls buckled and collapsed with a deafening roar, burying the Unas under tons of rubble. Only a handful of the aliens survived, stumbling out of the dust to surrender. In orbit, the Una's fleet faltered as news of Murloc's defeat spread. The humans pressed the attack, forcing the aliens to disengage and flee with their tails between their legs. Admiral Graves's voice crackled over the comms, flush with victory. "Give those greenhorns a hero's welcome when they get back, Zephyr. We've got the first transports of reinforcements and relief supplies inbound. Hold tight. We'll have you back on your feet in no time." As Alexander and the Marines emerged from the ruin of the battlefield, the colonists swarmed out to meet them, cheers rising from every throat. Governor Patel stepped forward, tears in her eyes as she clasped Alexander's hand. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. "Thank you for saving us." Alexander looked out over the celebration, the gratitude and relief on the faces of the people he'd fought to protect. But even in this moment of triumph, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Unas had tasted blood, and they would be back. Humanity had won the day, but the war was not nearly finished. They had to stand together, united and strong, ready for whatever threats the stars held in store. And Alexander knew he would be there on the front lines, fighting for the future of his people. The streets of Zephyr's capital erupted in celebration. Colorful banners fluttered from buildings still bearing scars of the recent battle. Crowds packed the main square, their cheers echoing off the walls. Alexander Parker stood on a makeshift stage, uncomfortable with the attention, but moved by the gratitude in the eyes of those he'd fought to protect. Governor Patel stepped forward, her voice carrying over the din. "Alexander Parker, on behalf of all Zephyr, we thank you. Your courage saved countless lives." The crowd roared its approval. Alexander nodded, managing a small smile. He scanned the sea of faces, reminded of why he fought. As the festivities continued into the night, a firm hand gripped Alexander's shoulder. He turned to see Admiral Graves and Captain Hawkins, their expressions grim despite the joyous atmosphere. "We need to talk," Graves said quietly, "in private." They retreated to a secluded corner. Hawkins spoke first. "The Unas aren't done. Reports are coming in from all over the border. Raids, incursions. Getting worse by the day." Graves nodded. "Intel suggests they're gearing up for a full-scale invasion. We need to hit them first, hard. And we want you to lead the charge, Parker." Alexander's brow furrowed. "What did you have in mind?" "A strike team, deep into Una's space. Their stronghold on Gokon," Hawkins explained. "Infiltrate, gather intel, sabotage key targets. If we pull it off, we cripple their war machine before it starts," Graves added. "If not..." He didn't need to finish the thought. Alexander weighed the stakes. "When do we leave?" The next weeks were a blur of preparation. Alexander handpicked his team. Hawkins, steady and reliable. Reeves, a tech wizard who could hack Una's systems in his sleep. O'Connor, demolitions expert with a talent for stealth. Dr. Patel, xenobiologist and combat medic. They trained relentlessly in a state-of-the-art simulator. Alexander stood at a hollow table, studying Una's patrol patterns. Reeves sat nearby, fingers flying over a captured Una's computer. O'Connor disassembled and reassembled alien weaponry, memorizing every component. Patel pored over biological data, searching for weaknesses. Their ship was a marvel of stealth technology, jam-packed with systems reverse-engineered from Una's tech. As they ran through pre-flight checks, news feeds blared reports of escalating border attacks, entire colonies going dark. "This is Operation Speartip," Graves said over the comm as they prepared for launch. "You're our best shot at stopping this war before it starts. Good hunting." The journey to Gokon was tense. Alexander studied tactical readouts as stars streaked by outside. His team remained focused, each running through mental checklists of their roles. As they neared Gokon, Alexander gathered them for a final briefing. "This is it. We get in, we get the intel, we blow their command centers sky high, watch each other's backs. No one gets left behind." Gokon loomed ahead, a fortress world filled with defenses. Alexander took a deep breath, steadying himself. The fate of humanity rested on what they did next. There was no room for failure. Failure. Alexander gripped the controls of the stealth ship as they approached Gokon's outer defenses. The vessel hummed quietly, its advanced cloaking tech masking their presence. Reeves monitored the sensor readings, his eyes darting across multiple displays. "Outer perimeter breach successful," Reeves reported. "No sign of detection." They slipped past automated defense platforms and patrol ships, the Unas completely oblivious to their presence. As Gorzoth came into view, Alexander activated the high-powered scanners. The team pored over the incoming data, searching for any weakness in the capital's defenses. "There!" Reeves exclaimed, highlighting an area on the holomap. "The western sewage tunnels. They've got a blind spot." O'Connor grimaced. "Sewers. Lovely." They landed under cover of darkness, the team moving swiftly to the access point O'Connor identified. The stench hit them as soon as they entered, but they pressed on. O'Connor led the way, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of Una's patrols. "Hold up," he whispered, raising a fist. The team froze as heavy footsteps echoed nearby. An Una's patrol passed overhead, oblivious to the humans mere meters below. Once clear, they continued on until reaching an abandoned maintenance duct. "This'll do," Alexander said, surveying the cramped space. "Set up shop." The team worked quickly, deploying sensor bafflers and holographic camouflage. Hawkins established a secure comlink back to human intelligence. "All right, time for some recon," Alexander announced. "Hawkins, you're with me. The rest of you, hold down the fort." Alexander and Hawkins moved through Gorzoth's streets, their holographic disguises allowing them to blend in seamlessly. They noted patrol routes, security checkpoints, and key military installations. As they passed a munitions factory, raised voices caught their attention. Two UNA's officers stood nearby, engrossed in conversation. "The attack force is nearly ready," one growled. "We'll hit multiple human worlds at once. They won't know what hit them." Alexander and Hawkins exchanged grim looks. They had to warn command. Back at base, Reeves was hunched over his datapad. "I've cracked some of their comms," he reported. "The attack is scheduled in just 3 weeks." "We need to stop them," O'Connor said. "What if we hit the shipyards? Cripple their ability to launch?" Alexander nodded. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot. Let's do it." Using stolen uniforms and holograms, they infiltrated the shipyards posing as a maintenance crew. O'Connor expertly placed demolition charges at key structural points. As they made their escape, alarms suddenly blared. The charges had detonated prematurely. "Run!" Alexander shouted as UNA's security forces poured in from all sides. Plasma bolts sizzled past their heads as they dove for cover. "Hawkins, Patel, get to the extraction point," Alexander ordered, returning fire. "We'll hold them off." The battle raged, Alexander and his remaining team members fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. Just as their situation seemed hopeless, the scream of engines filled the air. Human fighters swooped in, their weapons tearing through UNA's defenses. "Time to go," Alexander yelled. They sprinted for the sewers, dragging wounded comrades as explosions rocked the shipyards behind them. In orbit, their stealth ship rocketed away from Gokon, narrowly evading a pursuing UNA's fleet. A human battle group decloaked, catching the aliens in a devastating crossfire. Alexander's ship jumped to light speed just as a final barrage of enemy fire lanced past. Through the view screen, he watched Gokon's shipyards burn. The mission was a success, but the war was far from finished. Alexander's team stumbled off their battered ship, exhausted but alive. Admiral Graves waited on the landing pad, his face etched with concern. "We got it, sir," Alexander said, handing over a data drive. "The UNA's invasion plans. It's worse than we thought." Graves nodded grimly. "Get cleaned up. War Council in an hour." In the briefing room, Alexander laid out the intelligence. Holograms flickered to life, showing UNA's fleet movements and staging areas. "They're coming in force," he explained. "Multiple vectors, coordinated strikes. They mean to wipe us out." Silence fell as the implications sank in. Then Graves spoke. "We have a chance now, thanks to you. We'll position our fleets to meet them head-on." Days passed in a flurry of activity. Ships redeployed, colonies fortified. Alexander watched from the bridge of the flagship as humanity's defense lines took shape. The wait ended abruptly. Space rippled as thousands of UNA's ships tore into real space. The human fleet opened fire immediately, energy beams lancing out to meet the invaders. Battle raged across a dozen systems. On the tactical displays, Alexander saw human and UNA ships alike wink out of existence by the hundreds. Admiral Graves approached, his face grim. "Parker, we need to take out their command ship. It's coordinating the entire invasion. Without it, they'll fall apart." Alexander nodded. "I'll take a team aboard. We'll end this." They used captured UNA's shuttles, slipping past the raging space battle undetected. Reeves worked his magic, fooling the enemy sensors. "Docking successful," Reeves whispered as they latched onto the massive UNA's flagship. They moved swiftly through the alien corridors. An UNA's patrol rounded the corner. Before the aliens could react, Alexander and Hawkins cut them down with precision fire. Dr. Patel knelt by one of the fallen UNA's, examining it closely. "Aim for the secondary heart," she advised. "It's more exposed than the primary." They fought their way deeper into the ship. O'Connor's explosives cleared choke points while Reeves hacked security systems. Finally, they reached the bridge. The doors slid open to reveal a nightmarish scene. Dozens of UNA's officers worked at alien consoles, and there, in the center, stood the Supreme Commander. The massive UNA's turned, its eyes locking onto Alexander. With a roar, it charged. Alexander dove aside. narrowly avoiding the commander's crushing blow. They traded furious strikes, neither able to land a finishing blow. The rest of the team engaged the bridge crew, keeping them from interfering. Patel's knowledge proved invaluable, guiding their shots to vulnerable points. Alexander ducked under another swing, his combat knife finding a weak spot in the commander's armor. The Unas howled in pain and fury. With a final, desperate lunge, Alexander drove his blade deep into the alien's throat. The Supreme Commander collapsed, gurgling its last breaths. "Virus uploaded," Reeves shouted. O'Connor planted charges on key systems. "This place is gonna blow. Time to go." They sprinted for the hangar, alarms blaring all around them. They piled into captured Unas fighters just as the first explosions rocked the ship. As they streaked away from the doomed command vessel, Alexander saw the Unas fleet falling into disarray. Cut off from central control, they scattered in all directions. Human ships pressed the attack, driving the invaders back. The Unas' retreat became a rout as they fled for their lives. Alexander's fighter banked towards a human carrier, mission accomplished. The war wasn't over, but humanity had survived its darkest hour, and he knew the real work was just beginning. Alexander stood at attention as Admiral Graves pinned the Omega Corps insignia to his uniform. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders as he gazed out at the assembled troops. "Commander Parker, you've proven yourself time and again," Graves said. "The Omega Corps is our best hope for staying ahead of the Unas threat. I expect great things." Alexander nodded, his teeth gritted. "We won't let you down, sir." In the following weeks, he pored over personnel files, selecting only the most elite operatives. Hawkins, Reeves, O'Connor, and Patel were givens. He added sharpshooters, infiltration experts, and the brightest scientific minds humanity had to offer. The training regimen was brutal. Alexander watched as his team ran combat simulations against holographic Unas, studied alien physiology, and learned to operate stolen enemy tech. Patel lectured on Unas' weak points, while O'Connor taught improvised explosives. "Again!" Alexander barked as a squad failed to breach a simulated Unas stronghold. "Every second counts out there. Move like you mean it." Prototype weapons arrived daily. Alexander hefted a particle rifle reverse-engineered from Unas designs, feeling its unfamiliar weight. "Sir, we've got something," Reeves called out, hunched over a terminal. "Intercepted Unas transmissions. They're regrouping on a world called Tartarus." Alexander leaned in, studying the data. "And it looks like they've got a new leader. Prep for deployment. We need to hit them before they can rebuild." The Omega Corps' stealth frigate slipped into orbit around Tartarus undetected. Alexander led the infiltration team to the planet's surface, their adaptive camouflage blending seamlessly with the alien terrain. As they approached the Unas facility, Alexander held up a fist. The team froze as an Unas patrol stomped past, mere meters away. Once clear, they pressed on. Inside the complex, the stench of chemicals assaulted their senses. Alexander's blood ran cold as they entered a lab filled with human test subjects. Men, women, and children lay strapped to tables, their bodies twisted by horrific experiments. "Oh God," Patel whispered, checking vital signs. "Some are still alive. We need to get them out." "Do what you can," Alexander ordered. "The rest of us push forward. We end this now." They fought their way deeper, neutralizing Una's guards with ruthless efficiency. Alexander's particle rifle tore through alien armor as if it were paper. In the central chamber, they came face to face with the new Unas leader. Alexander's eyes widened in recognition. "Murloc," he snarled. The cybernetically enhanced Unas warlord loomed before them, more machine now than alien. "Pitiful humans," Murloc's voice boomed. "You cannot stop what is coming." A vicious firefight erupted. Alexander dove for cover as Murloc's arm cannons unleashed a barrage of plasma fire. Hawkins and Reeves flanked, drawing the warlord's fire. "The reactor," Reeves shouted over the comms. "If we overload it, this whole place goes up." Alexander nodded grimly. "Do it. We'll keep him busy." As Reeves worked, Alexander traded fire with Murloc. A near miss seared his armor, the heat sinking into his flesh. He pushed through the pain, emptying his rifle into the cyborg monstrosity. Alarms blared as the reactor destabilized. "It's done!" Hawkins yelled. "We need to move!" They fell back, dragging wounded comrades and rescued prisoners. Murlock's roars of fury echoed behind them as they raced for the exit. They piled into captured Una's ships just as the facility erupted in a massive fireball. Alexander watched grimly as they broke atmosphere, knowing Murlock had likely survived. Back in human space, Alexander delivered his report to a grim-faced admiralty. "Murlock lives," he concluded, "and he's planning something big, something that could finish what the invasion started." Admiral Graves nodded solemnly. "Our forces are spread thin rebuilding after the war. We can't face this alone." He fixed Alexander with the intense look. "You've got a new mission, Commander. Find us allies. Anyone who can help us stop Murlock before it's too late." Alexander straightened, ready for the challenge ahead. "Where do we start?" "The deep frontier," Graves replied. "There are powers out there we've only heard whispers of. It's time to make contact." As Alexander left to brief his team, the weight of humanity's fate pressed down upon him. The greatest test of the Omega Corps lay ahead, in the uncharted depths of space. Alexander paced the briefing room, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The gathered human leadership watched him intently as he laid out the stark reality of their situation. "Murlock's forces grow stronger by the day," he said, gesturing to the holographic display of Una's fleet movements. "Their technology outclasses ours in nearly every field. If we face them alone, we'll be crushed." Admiral Graves leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "What do you propose, Commander?" Alexander took a deep breath. "We need allies. There are advanced civilizations out there, ones with the power to turn the tide against the Unas. It's time we reached out to them." Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Graves nodded slowly, then tapped his datapad. A new set of holograms sprang to life, displaying alien worlds and ships unlike anything humanity had encountered before. "We've made contact with 2 potential allies," Graves explained. "The Krolvan Empire and the Alrathri Confederacy. Both possess technologies far beyond our own." Alexander studied the images. The Krolvan vessels bristled with weaponry, while the Alrathri ships seemed to shimmer and bend the very fabric of space around them. "You'll lead a diplomatic mission to both," Graves continued. "Secure these alliances by any means necessary. Humanity's survival depends on it." Days later, Alexander stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, the most advanced human cruiser ever built. His small team of Omega Corps operatives prepared for their first contact as the ship dropped out of FTL near the Krolvan homeworld of Cronus. A massive space station loomed before them, easily dwarfing their vessel. Krolvan warships swarmed around it like angry hornets. "Incoming transmission," Reeves reported from his console. A harsh, metallic voice filled the bridge. "Human vessel, you have entered restricted Krolvan space. State your purpose or be destroyed." Alexander stepped forward. "This is Commander Alexander Parker of Earth. We come seeking an alliance against a mutual threat." There was a long pause before the voice responded. "You will dock at these coordinates. Prepare to be boarded." As they approached the docking bay, Alexander caught his first glimpse of the Krolvan. Towering cybernetic beings strode purposefully through the station, their eyes glowing with an eerie blue light. Supreme Constructor Vozak awaited them, flanked by heavily armed guards. The Krolvan leader's face was an expressionless metal mask, but his voice dripped with disdain. "So the primitives come begging for scraps," Vozak sneered. "Why should we sully ourselves with your pathetic war?" Alexander stood his ground. "The Unas threat will reach you eventually. Together we can stop them before—" Vozak cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Your weapons are toys. Your ships are fragile. You have nothing to offer us." The negotiations deteriorated rapidly from there. Alexander's team watched helplessly as their last hope for an alliance slipped away. Suddenly, Dr. Patel gasped. She had been surreptitiously scanning the Krolvan with her medical tricorder. "Commander, look at this," she whispered, showing him the readouts. Alexander's eyes widened as he studied the data. He turned back to Vozak, a new plan forming. "Supreme Constructor," he said carefully, "what if I told you we could solve your obsolescence problem?" Vozak's glowing eyes flared. "What do you know of our internal affairs?" Alexander pressed on. "Your cybernetic enhancements are failing. Your bodies are rejecting them. But we can help. Human medical science has made incredible advances in biotechnology and cybernetic integration." For the first time, uncertainty crept into Vozak's voice. "You claim you can repair us?" "Not just repair," Alexander said. "Improve, enhance, make you stronger than ever before." He nodded to Patel, who stepped forward with her medical kit. "With your permission, Supreme Constructor, I can demonstrate on one of your guards." Vozak hesitated, then gestured to a nearby Krolvin. Patel worked quickly, injecting a series of nanites and applying localized energy fields. Within minutes, the guard's movements became smoother, more fluid. His eyes glowed brighter. "Impossible," Vozak whispered. Alexander allowed himself a small smile. "This is just the beginning. Imagine what we could accomplish together." The tide had turned. Within hours, the humans and Krolvin were deep in negotiations, hammering out the details of their new alliance. With one potential ally secured, Alexander's team reboarded the horizon and set course for their next destination, the mysterious Nexus Station, home of the Alrathri Confederacy. The journey took them through uncharted space, past swirling nebulae and dead stars. Finally, they arrived at a point that seemed empty to the naked eye. "I'm not reading anything," Hawkins reported from the sensor station. Reeves frowned at his console. "Wait, there's something strange, some kind of dimensional fluctuation." Suddenly, reality itself seemed to twist. A massive structure phased into existence before them. The Nexus Station, a mind-bending construct of impossible geometries and shimmering energy fields. "Incredible," Alexander breathed. Reeves worked feverishly at his station, initiating the carefully prepared first contact protocols. Long moments passed in tense silence. Then, a voice unlike anything they had ever heard filled their minds. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, but somehow all of these at once. "Welcome, young ones," the voice said. "We have long awaited your arrival." Alexander stepped forward, fighting down his nervousness. "I am Commander Alexander Parker of Earth. We come seeking—" "We know why you have come," the voice interrupted. "Your species stands at a crossroads. Your potential is great, but so too is the darkness that threatens to consume you." The voice paused, and Alexander felt an intense pressure building in his skull. "Before we can consider an alliance," the voice continued, "we must know the true nature of your spirit. You will be tested, Alexander Parker. Are you prepared?" Alexander swallowed hard, then nodded. "I am." The world around him dissolved into swirling mists. He found himself alone in a featureless void. Then the visions began. He saw Murloc, more monstrous than ever, tearing through Earth's defenses. He watched helplessly as his team was cut down one by one. Cities burned, continents shattered, as humanity was systematically exterminated. Alexander screamed in rage and anguish, but the visions kept coming, each one more terrible than the last. He felt his mind beginning to fracture under the assault. But deep within, a spark of defiance ignited. With titanic effort, he pushed back against the visions. He focused on why he fought, on the people he protected, on the future he believed in. Slowly, painfully, he regained control. The visions faded, replaced by a sense of acceptance and respect. "You have proven yourself worthy," the voice said as Alexander found himself back on the bridge of the horizon. "We will stand with you against the coming storm." Exhausted but triumphant, Alexander turned to his team. "Prepare for docking. We have an alliance to forge." The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Alexander presented the combined alliance offer to the human leadership, who debated tough over the risks and benefits. In the end, desperation won out over caution. The alliances were approved, and a massive technology exchange began. Reeves worked tirelessly to coordinate the flow of information and resources between the three species. Alexander watched with pride as the first of the new hybrid ships took shape in Earth's orbital shipyards. Sleek human designs were enhanced with Krolvan cybernetics and Al-Rathri psionic technology, creating vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But even as hope began to flourish, a new threat loomed. Long-range sensors detected a massive buildup of Una's forces near the strategically vital Grak Nebula. Standing on the bridge of his new flagship, Alexander surveyed the combined human, Krolvan, and Al-Rathri armada assembling before him. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the fight to come. "All ships, prepare for jump," he ordered. "We end this today." In a flash of light, the Allied fleet vanished, racing to confront Murlock's forces in what would surely be the most apocalyptic struggle in human history. The swirling gases of the Grak Nebula erupted in a dazzling array of colors as the Allied armada dropped out of FTL. Alexander stood on the bridge of his flagship surveying the assembled forces. Human warships formed the vanguard, their sleek hulls gleaming. Behind them loomed the massive Krolvan dreadnoughts, jam-packed with cybernetic weaponry. The ethereal Al-Rathri vessels shimmered at the edges of normal space, ready to bend reality itself. "All ships, battle formations," Alexander ordered, his voice steady despite the weight of command. "Engage the enemy." The human ships surged forward, absorbing the initial barrage from Murlock's forces. Energy beams and plasma torpedoes slammed into their hulls, but the enhanced shields held. Alexander winced as damage reports flooded in, knowing each hit meant lives lost. Through the chaos of battle, a blinding light erupted from Murlock's flagship. The experimental weapon lashed out, slicing through space itself. Human cruisers crumpled under its assault, their hulls shearing apart. "Al-Rathri void dancers now," Alexander shouted into the comms. The air shimmered as the Al-Rathri focused their powers. Reality warped around the energy beam, redirecting its destructive force harmlessly into empty space. With the immediate threat neutralized, Alexander turned to his team. "It's time. We're going in." They raced to the hangar bay, where captured Una's fighters waited. As they strapped in, Alexander saw grit etched on every face. They knew the stakes. "Void dancers are ready," Reeves reported. "On your mark, Commander." Alexander took a deep breath. "Execute." The world blurred around them as the Al-Rathri phased their ships through solid matter. For a heart-stopping moment, they existed in multiple realities at once. Then they burst into Murlock's hangar bay, alarms blaring as they touched down. "Move fast," Alexander ordered. "Hawkins, take your team to the engine room. Plant those charges. The rest of you with me. We're heading for the bridge." They split up, racing through the labyrinthine corridors of the Una's flagship. Alexander's team encountered the first of Murlock's cybernetic guards at a security checkpoint. Energy weapons flashed as they dove for cover. Alexander rolled behind a bulkhead, returning fire. His enhanced rifle punched through the guard's armor, but more were coming. They fought their way forward, step by bloody step. "Charges set," Hawkins' voice crackled over the comm. 5 minutes to detonation." "Copy that," Alexander replied, ducking under a plasma blast. "Reeves, start the upload." As they neared the bridge, the resistance intensified. Murlock's elite guards swarmed them, their cybernetic bodies shrugging off most attacks. Alexander's team was forced back, pinned down by overwhelming firepower. Then Alexander spotted an access panel. He remembered Patel's briefing on Una's cyborg weaknesses. With a desperate lunge, he jammed his multi-tool into the panel and triggered an electromagnetic pulse. The guard's cybernetics flickered and failed. In that moment of vulnerability, Alexander's team struck. They cleared the last obstacle and burst onto the bridge. Murlock stood waiting, a hulking monstrosity of metal and flesh. "So, the human comes to die," he growled. Alexander raised his weapon. "It's over, Murlock. Surrender now." Murlock's answer was a blur of motion. His cybernetic arm lashed out, faster than human reflexes could track. Alexander barely managed to dodge, feeling the wind of the blow as it passed. They clashed in a brutal melee. Alexander's enhanced strength and speed were barely enough to keep him alive against Murloc's cybernetic fury. Sparks flew as they traded blows, the bridge crumbling around them. A lucky strike sent Alexander sprawling. Murloc loomed over him, ready to deliver the killing blow. But Alexander had been waiting for this moment. He jammed his last EMP grenade into a gap in Murloc's armor and triggered it. Murloc's systems overloaded. As the UNA's commander staggered back, Alexander seized his chance. He slammed Murloc into the command console, pinning him there. "This is Commander Alexander Parker to all UNA's forces," he broadcast. "Your leader is defeated. Stand down now or be destroyed." But the UNA's captains refused to yield. New alarms blared as Murloc's guards converged on the bridge. Alexander's team fell back, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Just as all seemed lost, the ship rocked violently. Hawkins's charges detonated, crippling the engines. Through the viewscreen, Alexander saw Krolvin's ships focusing their fire on the flagship. "Time to go," he shouted to his team. They fought their way to the evacuation shuttles, Murloc's forces hot on their heels. Plasma bolts sizzled past as they piled into the shuttles and launched. As they raced away from the doomed flagship, Alexander saw space itself twist around it. The Alrathri Void Dancers were using their powers to crush the massive ship. Sections of hull imploded, crumpling like paper. They rendezvoused with the Allied fleet just in time to see the last of Murloc's forces scatter. The Battle of Grak Nebula was won, but Alexander knew this was nowhere near the end. As damage reports and casualty lists poured in, he stared out at the starfield. Somewhere out there, Murloc had escaped to plot his revenge. Alexander clenched his fist, vowing to be ready when that day came. Alexander stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the Grak Nebula. The swirling clouds of gas and dust seemed to mock the devastation they had just witnessed. He felt the weight of command pressing down on him, heavier than ever before. "Status report!" he barked, turning to face his assembled team. Reeves spoke up first, his fingers dancing across his datapad. "Allied fleet casualties at 23%, Commander. Krolvin dreadnoughts took the brunt of it. We've lost contact with 3 Alrathri Void Dancer squadrons." Alexander nodded grimly. "And Murloc?" "Escaped," Hawkins growled, smacking his palm on the console. "Long-range probes picked up a massive energy signature in the Trinox system. It's him, sir. He's regrouping." The air on the bridge grew thick with tension. Alexander paced, his mind racing through potential strategies. Before he could speak, the comm system crackled to life. "Commander Parker," a harsh, guttural voice filled the room. "This is Vozak of the Krolvin. We demand immediate action against Murloc. Our spies report he's building a doomsday weapon. We must strike now." Alexander opened his mouth to respond, but another voice cut in, this one ethereal and multi-layered. "Patience, allies," the Alrathri representative cautioned. "We must not act rashly. More intelligence is needed." The argument escalated quickly, with Vozak's booming voice drowning out the Alrathri's measured tones. Alexander watched the faces of his crew, saw the fear and uncertainty in their eyes. He knew he had to act. "Enough!" he shouted, silencing both alien leaders. "We can't afford to fight amongst ourselves. I propose a compromise, a stealth strike. We take out Murloc's weapon and capture him in one swift move." Silence fell over the comms as both sides considered his words. Finally, Vozak grunted in agreement, followed by a soft assent from the Alrathri. With the plan set, Alexander turned to his team. "Hawkins, I need a detailed analysis of Trinox defenses. Reeves, prep our captured UNA's ships. We're going in quiet." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Alexander handpicked his strike team, including the seasoned O'Connor and the brilliant xenobiologist Patel. As they prepared, Hawkins approached with his findings. "It's not good, sir," Hawkins said, bringing up a holographic map of the Trinox system. "Murloc's fortress is a death trap. Energy shields, automated defense grids, constant patrols. Getting in undetected is impossible." Alexander studied the defenses, his brow furrowed. What about the Alrathri void dancers? Could they phase us through? Hawkins nodded slowly. It's risky, but it might work. We'd need perfect timing. Then that's our play, Alexander decided. Brief the team. We move in 6 hours. The captured Una ships slipped through space, their hulls shimmering with Alrathri camouflage. Alexander felt his heart pounding as they approached Murloc's fortress world. Everything hinged on stealth now. As they entered the atmosphere, automated defenses sprang to life. Plasma bolts and energy beams lanced out, searching for targets. But thanks to Reeves's virus uploads, the enemy systems saw only empty space. They touched down on a hidden landing pad, the Void Dancer's powers hiding them from prying eyes. Alexander led his team into the sprawling facility, every sense on high alert. They moved swiftly through sterile corridors, the distant sound of machinery growing louder. Suddenly, alarms blared. A squad of cybernetic Una's super soldiers rounded the corner, their augmented eyes locking onto the intruders. "Contact!" O'Connor shouted, opening fire with his plasma rifle. The air filled with energy bolts and the scream of tearing metal. Alexander dove for cover, returning fire as he shouted orders. The Una soldiers seemed unstoppable, shrugging off hits that would have vaporized a normal opponent. "Patel!" Alexander called out. "You said you had something for these bastards." The xenobiologist nodded, pulling a small device from her pack. She activated it, sending out a pulse of energy that made the air ripple. The Una soldiers staggered, their cybernetic components shorting out. "Now!" Alexander roared, leading the charge. They fought their way deeper into the complex, leaving disabled Unas in their wake. Finally, they reached a massive set of blast doors, Murloc's inner sanctum. "Reeves, get us in," Alexander ordered. As Reeves worked on the door, Hawkins set up explosive charges around the chamber. 2 minutes to detonation, Commander. We need to move fast. The doors hissed open, revealing a cavernous laboratory filled with bubbling vats and pulsing energy conduits. And there, at the center of it all, stood Murloc. The Una's warlord's cybernetic eye gleamed as he turned to face them. "Parker!" he snarled. "I should have known you'd come yourself." Alexander raised his weapon. "It's over, Murloc. Surrender now." Murloc's answer was a blur of motion as he charged. Alexander met him head-on, their battle a furious exchange of blows that sent them crashing through delicate equipment. As they fought, Reeves raced to a central console. His fingers flew across the alien controls, uploading the virus that would wipe out Murloc's doomsday program. "Charges armed," Hawkins shouted over the comms. 1 minute. Alexander grappled with Murloc, struggling to pin the massive Unas, but a vicious blow sent him reeling, separating him from his team. "Commander," O'Connor yelled, "we have to go now." Alexander saw the desperation in his team's eyes as they fought off waves of Una's reinforcements. He knew what he had to do. "Get out of here!" he ordered. "That's an order!" The last thing Alexander saw was the shimmer of Alrathri energy as the Void Dancers phased his team to safety. Then the world erupted in fire and noise. When the smoke cleared, Alexander found himself buried under a mountain of debris. Every inch of his body screamed in pain, but he was alive. Somehow, he had survived. As he clawed his way out of the rubble, he saw Murloc doing the same. Their eyes met across the devastated lab. Without a word, the Unas warlord banged his hand into a nearby console. Warning klaxons blared as Murloc's voice echoed through the facility. "Purge protocols initiated. May you burn with my ambitions, human." Alexander watched in horror as chain reactions began to spread across the planet's surface. He knew the Allied fleet would have no choice but to retreat, leaving him behind. As explosions consumed the horizon, Alexander stumbled through the ruins. His eyes fell on a partially intact EM shield generator. With relentless drive, he began to salvage what he could. The sky turned to fire above him, but Alexander refused to give up. Somehow he would find a way off this doomed world. Somehow he would make it home. Alexander dragged himself from the wreckage, every breath burning in his lungs. The acrid air stung his eyes as he surveyed the devastation around him. Trinnock's surface was a hellscape of twisted metal and smoldering craters. He checked his suit's readouts, oxygen levels critically low, radiation spiking. With grim focus, Alexander salvaged what he could from the ruins. A half-crushed med kit, a portable air scrubber. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Days blurred together as he trekked across the barren wasteland. Each step was agony, his body weakening from the constant assault of Trinnock's poisoned atmosphere. He rationed his dwindling supplies ruthlessly, knowing that to falter meant death. On the 5th day, he encountered his first group of surviving Unas. Their cybernetic enhancements sparked and sputtered, damaged by the electromagnetic pulses that had ravaged the planet. But their hatred for humanity burned as fiercely as ever. Alexander ducked behind a chunk of fallen debris as plasma bolts seared the air around him. He returned fire, his shots precise despite his exhaustion. One by one, the Unas fell. But more would come. They always did. He pushed on, driven by a singular purpose, to find a way off this dying world. His suit's sensors picked up faint energy signatures in the distance, a potential rescue beacon, or another death trap. As he neared the source, the ground gave way beneath him. Alexander plummeted into darkness, landing hard on a metal grate far below. Groaning, he pushed himself up, activating his suit's lights. He found himself in a vast underground complex, and he wasn't alone. "Don't move," a ragged voice called out. Alexander turned slowly, hands raised, to face a group of emaciated humans. Their eyes were wild with fear and suspicion, improvised weapons clutched in trembling hands. "I'm Commander Alexander Parker," he said carefully. "I'm here to help." A woman stepped forward, her face gaunt, but her gaze sharp. "Parker? The one who led the attack on Murlock's flagship?" Alexander nodded. "That's right. And you are?" "Dr. Alara Chen," she replied. "Lead researcher, or I was, before—" She gestured at their grim surroundings. "Before Murlock decided we'd make better test subjects than scientists." Alexander listened as Dr. Chen explained their situation. They were the last survivors of Murlock's cruel experiments, hiding in the bowels of an abandoned Unas facility. But their time was running out. The planet's atmosphere was becoming more toxic by the day. "There's a downed Unas freighter not far from here," Dr. Chen said. "We've been trying to reach it, but the surface is crawling with Murlock's loyalists." Alexander's mind raced. That freighter might be our only shot at getting off this rock, but we'll need to work together. He laid out his plan, answering their questions and addressing their concerns. Slowly, the distrust in their eyes gave way to cautious hope. "It won't be easy," Alexander warned them, "but it's our best chance." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "We're with you, Commander. Lead the way." Together, they began to prepare for the dangerous journey ahead. Alexander knew the odds were stacked against them, but as he looked at the determined faces of these survivors, he felt a flicker of hope. They would make it off this planet, or die trying.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.